Today we're going to look at an occasion when Jesus was invited to a dinner party. And it's in Luke's Gospel, and it's in chapter 7, and it's on page 1046 of the blue Bibles, which will be around you, and it will also be coming up on the screen. So Luke 7, starting at verse 36. Now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's home and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of a woman she is, that she's a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he cancelled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt cancelled. You've judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned towards the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But the one who has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say amongst themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. My talk today is called How to Take Risks. How to take risks. And it's so important to take risks in life. I think we'd all agree with that. We don't want to live our life in the comfort zone, in the safe space, never taking any risks. It's sometimes said that the greatest risk in life is never to take a risk in your life. But how do you know what are the right risks to take? We don't just want to take risks without thinking about it. What are the right risks? What are the right rewards to aim for? And this might be a very real question for you today. You might be here today and you're weighing up a risk in your life. Maybe in a relationship. Should I start a new relationship? Should I carry on with this relationship? Should I get engaged? Should I get married? Should I start a new relationship? You're wrestling with it. It might be in your career. Someone's offered you a new job and you're trying to work out, is this where I want to go? Do I want to work for that boss? Do I want to start that company? Do I want to take a risk on that person? It might be in your family or in your community or in your home. And sometimes the most important risk of all can be taking a risk in terms of your faith. Some of you might be here for the first time today, or you've just started coming in the last few months. And it felt like a huge risk just to walk up the driveway and take a seat in this building. And you're kind of thinking, do I want to take another risk? Is it worth taking a risk on this person called Jesus? There are so many risks in life. How do we work out what risks to take? How do we work out if it's worth the reward? Well, our passage today speaks directly into that question of how to take risks. And the first thing it tells us is no risk, no reward. No risk, no reward. I find this a remarkable account of what happened. Simon, who's a Pharisee, one of the religious and political leaders of Jesus' time, invites Jesus to a dinner party. And by doing that, he's already taking a risk, sort of, because he is exposing himself. He's inviting him with a number of other Pharisees. And Jesus is quite a controversial character. He says and does things that undermine the religious and political leaders of his time. He seems to undermine their authority. He says outrageous things. And also, once you've got him at your dinner party, you've got no idea of what he's actually going to do or say. I mean, when you invite Jesus for supper, all bets are off. Anything can happen. And so Simon's taking a risk. But he's also hedging that risk. He's carefully hedging the risk. So he's invited him for supper, but he's not going to get too close to Jesus. He's going to make sure everyone knows he's not a friend of Jesus. He's curious, but he's going to keep him at arm's length. He's not going to take a risk with his reputation, with his status, with how he's viewed amongst the other Pharisees. How do we know this? Well, it's really interesting, actually. If you invite someone for supper today, for dinner today, for a meal today, in the UK in 2017, there are a number of things which you would probably do without even thinking about it. Sam's going to help me demonstrate this. So I've invited Sam over for a meal tonight. He comes and he knocks on my door, and without even thinking about it, you would open the door and you would welcome him, and you might shake his hand. If you were particularly street, you might give him a little fist pump. You might give him a hug. If you're in West London, you might do this thing you've seen sometimes, like the most remarkable air kiss. So you kind of go, never the two heads meeting. And you might do any number of those things. Now, it's important if you just moved to the UK from another culture. Actually, one of the most important things in this greeting is that you've got to be a little bit confused and awkward about it. In Britain, we don't like to go in for the kill, so there's a little bit of a dance where you try and work out, are we shaking hands, are we hugging, are we kissing, is it one or two? That's all part of the thing. And actually, it can get quite awkward. I still remember vividly when I was 18 years old, being in a nightclub in Luton and seeing, actually, one of the hardest guys from my school in the nightclub, and I went over to greet him, but it was dark, it was crowded, and I went over to shake his hand, and he went out to give me a fist pump, and I ended up shaking his clenched fist. And let me tell you, that's just about as awkward as it gets. So you do something like that, and then you would probably say, come in, and you'd say, can I take your coat? So you'd take his coat off him, and you'd carefully stash it somewhere, and then you'd welcome him in, you'd offer him a drink, you would offer him a place to sit, and you would do all that without even thinking about it, just because you wanted to host your guest well. Now that's in Britain. Now we like to think we're really polite in Britain, but if you've moved here from another culture, you might have noticed that when we first meet people, British people can be a little bit reserved. And in other cultures, particularly if you've come from somewhere like Egypt or the Middle East, hosting is like an art form. And when you host, you really host. There's no messing around about it. The evening meal is the most important meal of the day. And when you host someone, you want them to know beyond any shadow of a doubt that they are absolutely welcome in your home. So there's no kind of shall we, shan't we. You go up to them, you say, come in, and you give them a big kiss on their lips. You need to welcome them. There can't be any doubt about it. And of course, it's dusty, it's hot in that climate. So there's not many roads, it's dusty, it's hot, it's sweaty. Only the rich have horses. So most people are going around in barefoot. And so when people in Jesus' time would come to someone's house at that time, you would offer them some water to wash their feet. There you go. I'm not doing it for him. That's another story. And then also, because it's so hot and sweaty, you don't have deodorant. Soap isn't readily available. So what you would do is you would offer them some kind of sweet-smelling oil. And people would use this very much like soap, actually, just to freshen up before the meal. And I've got some very sweetly smelling oil. It's fragrance with something called olives. And it says in the passage that you're supposed to pour this on your head. So maybe I'll just give that to you and let you have it for later. Is that okay? Thank you very much to Sam. What I find fascinating, what is remarkable, what is shocking about this account is that Jesus is invited to the house. He comes in, and none of that happens. He is not welcomed or hosted in any way. It is completely shocking in any culture, but particularly in that culture. It seems that Simon is willing to invite Jesus to his house, but he doesn't want to take the risk of being associated with him. Not prepared to take the risk of being seen as a friend of Jesus, or even as someone who knows him. And I don't know about you, but I find it very easy to be held back by the fear of what might others think. Will they think less of me if I do this? Will it change people's view of me? What if I take a risk and it doesn't pay out? What if I fall flat on my face? And it's very easy to be so aware of the reactions of others that we miss the opportunities which are right in front of us. You can easily be so over-anticipating negative reactions by others that you underappreciate the remarkable opportunities which are right before your eyes. We can focus all our energy on what other people are thinking and miss this remarkable opportunity to engage with Jesus, who is in front of us and encouraging us to take a risk. What does that look like? Well, I was born and bred in a beautiful town called Luton. I don't talk about it much. I'm very kind of shy about it. But I love my hometown. But the school I went to was quite a rough school. Actually, it was known as the worst school in Luton. And that's quite a difficult accolade to achieve, actually. And just to give you a flavour of it, 84% of students didn't actually get 5 Cs in their GCSEs. So it was quite a difficult place. And what happens if you're the worst school in a town, or what happened then, was that all the other schools would expel their students and they'd end up at your school. So you don't have, you've already got your own dangerous, quite difficult people, and then everyone else sends you theirs as well. So it can become quite a rough, violent place, and our school did. And that would have been fine. The only problem was that I quite liked school. I liked studying. I enjoyed reading. I thought Shakespeare and Dickens were a good read. And that meant that the teachers at my school liked me. And at my school, that was the kiss of death. And so even though I had some kind of, I was interested in faith, I was interested in Jesus, I wasn't going to talk about it or actively pursue it because I felt like I didn't need to give people an extra opportunity to take me on. They had enough ammunition already. But one Sunday night, my dad took me along to church. And there was a church across the road from our school. And I came along. And actually, I sat about 3 rows from the back, which I thought was safe. And I sat there and I kind of looked around. And I actually realized, this isn't so bad. I'm actually quite enjoying this. It's like one of those situations, where you set your expectations so low that it's quite easy for them to be surpassed. Some of you might be experiencing that very thing now. But that's how I felt. And so I was thinking, actually, I'm quite interested in this. And then, to my absolute horror, all the most difficult, dangerous, violent guys in my school just piled in at the back of the church. And I thought, I do not believe this is happening. I'm completely stuck. They're going to see me. What are they going to think? What are the consequences going to be? And suddenly I wasn't focusing on the service at all. I was focusing on how do I ever hide myself. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to study the scriptures carefully. So I kind of lifted the scriptures up and was kind of studying them. I kind of slouched down in my seat. And after a moment, I thought, maybe I'm getting away with this. Maybe they haven't seen me yet. And then I heard the unmistakable dulcet tones of my wonderful father saying, "Hello, lads, are you looking for Steve? He's just over there." I love my dad. What's he doing? And so they came over, and so they're kind of looking at me. There's a little bit of laughter. What's going on? And I was so aware. I was thinking, what are they thinking? What are the consequences going to be? Has this changed things? But as it turned out, they had actually just committed quite a major commercial burglary at an industrial estate up the road. And they were on the run from the police. So they'd been running down the high street, and they'd just nipped into the church to look for somewhere to hide. And they thought this would be a good place to hide. They came in, there was a service going on, so they didn't know what to do. So they were sitting there, not thinking about me at all. They were sitting there thinking, have we escaped from the police? Can we hear a siren? Is anyone coming this way? So I thought they would be thinking about me, but actually weren't thinking about me at all. And actually on the Monday, I was so worried about it, but all that happened was one of them came up to me, and he kind of looked me in the eye and he said, "Foster, you go to church?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Safe." Doesn't sound like a long conversation, but quite a lot was said in those 6 words. It's sometimes said that when you're in your 20s and 30s, you worry a lot about what people are thinking about you, what they think about you. When you're in your 40s and 50s, you actually stop worrying about what people are thinking about you. And when you're in your 60s and 70s, you realize actually people aren't thinking about you. But even if you have to take some flack, the risk is worth the reward. Don't miss out. What's so sad about this scene is that the religious leaders had one job, actually, which was to wait for the Messiah and to welcome him when he came. And he was right there. Jesus was right there in the room with them. They could have reached out and touched him, but they weren't prepared to take the risk. Don't miss out. No risk, no reward. But this passage also tells us no reward, no risk. See, there's also a woman in this room, and the way she's described means she's actually someone who had worked as a sex worker. And as you can imagine, in that culture, that was a very tough life to lead. treated very badly, despised by everyone, treated so terribly by men. And it appears that she has heard Jesus' message and that he's come to bring forgiveness for sins, to help people be restored in their relationship with God. And she is captivated by Jesus, so much so that she is prepared to go to this private house, to a dinner she's not invited to make her way in. And that's incredibly risky. The party's being held by Pharisees, people who on other occasions had stoned people with her background to death. And yet she comes in. She's in no doubt what they think about her. She doesn't know how they're going to react, but she's prepared to take the risk. It's incredibly brave. And when she sees how Jesus is being treated by them, she goes by his feet and she just weeps. And then she wets his feet with her tears and she wipes his feet with her hair. And then she pours her perfume, her most valuable possession, out on his feet. And the contrast is striking. Simon isn't prepared to take the risk of giving a bowl of water for Jesus' feet, but she wets his feet with her tears and wipes them with her hair. He isn't prepared to give Jesus a kiss, but she doesn't stop kissing his feet. Simon wouldn't give him some oil to freshen up, and she pours out perfume on him. And you'd think that Simon would be quite challenged by this, but he's not challenged by it. He's actually outraged by it. He says he thinks if Jesus was a prophet and was sent by God, he would know what sort of a woman she is. He wouldn't let her come near him, let alone touch him. And Jesus knows what Simon is thinking, and he asks him a question. He says, 2 people owed money to the same person. One owed around 1 year's salary, one owed about 1 month's, and neither can repay the debt. And to us, if you can't repay the debt, you can't repay the debt. If you can't sort it out on your own, you can't sort it out on your own. Doesn't matter if it's 50 or 500. And Jesus says the person forgave the debts of both. So who loves him more? Who loves him more? And Simon says, the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. And Jesus says, that's right. And he's obviously talking about this woman. She's been forgiven much, so she loves much. She's taken the risk of placing her trust in Jesus. And you know, risk is very close to faith. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. When you take a step of faith, you're taking a risk. And this woman has taken a risk, and she's placed her trust in Jesus. And what does Jesus say to her? Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. She's taken a risk. But why does she do that? Because she knows she's forgiven and because she loves much. Because she loves much, she risks much. Actually, love always precedes risk. What does that look like? Well, I just want to be quite honest with you, make a little confession here. I'm not easily frightened. I don't easily get scared. I'm quite happy to jump off cliffs into the sea. If there's a fight in a bar, I tend to be drawn towards it rather than away from it. I don't know why that is. But there is one thing that I'm absolutely terrified of, completely terrified of, and that is roller coasters. And there's no need to laugh. And it's partly a completely irrational fear. I mean, it's a roller coaster. But it's also, for me, a slightly irrational fear. When I was 11 years old, I actually saw one of my friends fall out of a roller coaster, and they broke their collarbone. Once you've seen that, you kind of have a slightly difficult relationship with roller coasters. I'd actually spent much of the next 10 years kind of avoiding roller coasters at every opportunity. But then I started going out with a girl called Beth, and we went on a day trip to Blackpool one day. And we got there, and to my horror, I looked up at the skyline, and I saw this. It's called the Big One. At that time, it was the second biggest roller coaster in the world. It was the fastest roller coaster in Europe. And at that moment, and just so you can see just how tall it is, here's a view from the top. It's quite high. And at that moment, Beth says, she hasn't said this, she says, I love roller coasters. I love going on roller coasters. Let's go on that roller coaster. And you know there's a moment in every relationship where you have to confess your kind of deepest, darkest secret. I thought this wasn't that moment. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. And we got in the queue, and I had this kind of fixed grin, and my eyes were wide, and all I was thinking was, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? Do I fake illness? Do I fake death? Do I just run off and never be seen again? Like, what do I do? And we got closer and closer to the front of the queue, and I just couldn't think of any excuse why I wouldn't go on this roller coaster. So in the end, I found myself sitting in one of those little cars, and the ride is about to start, and I'm thinking, this is it. Here we go. And then, they have those little bars that move up and down, and they're supposed to lock into place to keep you safe. Mine wasn't locking into place. And I started to get a little bit anxious about this, and it was kind of moving around a lot. And so I called over the guy. I wasn't messing around. I said, excuse me, can you just come and have a look, mate? Can you come have a look? This isn't working. And he came over, and to my horror, he kind of said, oh, yeah, it looks like it's broken. And he kind of reached down to fix it, and then the ride started. And I said, mate, and he goes, don't worry, it'll be fine. So there I am, at the top of that roller coaster, looking across Blackpool, beautiful sea, industrial estates, thinking, this is it. This is what I see before I die. Soak it in. And then I just braced myself as we went down this first dip. And basically, I was just waiting for the impact with the ground. And, they're very kind. They take a little photo of you. And Beth is kind of smiling away, having the time of her life. And there's me just kind of bracing for impact next to her. It was awful. Actually, you'll be relieved to know I didn't die. And I lived to tell the tale. But I was thinking, why did I take that risk? Part of it was in hope of the reward. I really like Beth. I hope to spend my life with her. I thought it's worth that risk to hopefully get the reward of Beth. And I'm happy to say 13 years later, she was worth the risk. But also, I wouldn't have done that for anyone. It was because I'd tasted something of the reward, because I knew something of that reward, because I knew actually that I loved her, because I knew she loved me, because I knew this was something worth building, that I was prepared to take that risk. Sometimes the reward precedes the risk. It's because you've had a sense of the reward that you're emboldened to take the risk. And this woman takes a huge risk. She comes in, she shows her love for Jesus, her thankfulness, her appreciation. And the reason she's prepared to take that risk is she has already received something from Jesus. She's felt the breathless wonder of forgiveness. She knows that Jesus came to forgive her. So her awareness of her forgiveness overflows in love. She's forgiven much, so she loves much. And to the extent you know you're forgiven is the extent to which you will love. And actually, when you love, you take risks. She takes a risk because of her love. Actually, the Pharisees aren't prepared to take that risk. They're worried about their status. They're worried about their reputation. And actually, there's been times when I've been so focused, so devoted to my career, to success at work, I've invested everything in it. And the truth is, sometimes you can be prepared to risk everything for that thing you set your heart on. You can risk your relationships, your family, your partners, even your health, out of a love, out of a hope for success, for power, for influence, for wealth, for popularity, for fame. The hope of a perfect romantic relationship. And they're not bad things. They can be good things. But they were never meant to be ultimate things. They were never meant to carry all the weight of all your hopes, all your dreams, all your love. And the story Jesus tells is fascinating because neither person can pay. It doesn't matter if the size of your debt is 500 or if it's 50. It doesn't matter if you can't pay. And the reason he tells it to Simon, the reason he gives him this story is he wants him to know that Simon too needs forgiveness. He might think he's led a perfect life. He might think he's led a moral life. But he needs forgiveness. They both need forgiveness. The woman knows it. She receives it. She's so thankful for it. Simon is blind to it. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm tempted, like Simon, to divide the world up, into good people and bad people. Just not personally you. But it's more complicated than that. I used to represent, I was a criminal defense barrister for a number of years, and I've represented hundreds, over 1,000 people accused of criminal offences. Actually, it's great to see so many of you here today. But people would often ask me, what are criminals like? What are criminals like? And I would say to them, oh, they're just like you. Shock, horror, offense. But it's true, people are just people. And sometimes people make mistakes in really public, visible ways, huge mistakes. And sometimes it's more private and personal. But ultimately, we all build our lives. We all risk building our lives on things that can't ultimately satisfy us, on career, on wealth, on fame, on a desire for something. And those things will eventually force you to risk everything for them. They will always give you the promise, if you just have a little bit more of me, a little bit more success, a little bit more influence, a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, then you'll know satisfaction, then you'll know purpose, then you'll know peace. And they kind of tempt you to give up everything else, push everything else to the side. But actually, they're never enough. But I've found there's only one person, actually, who before I even thought of risking anything for him, risked everything for me. Who came and risked himself coming for me, who didn't just risk his life on the cross, but gave his life on the cross for me. And when you see that Jesus has given everything for you, that the Son of God loves you and gave himself for you, it completely shifts the whole dynamic of risk. Why? Because when someone risks themselves for you, before you've even risked anything for them, you can trust them. And you can trust him. Because he's shown absolute, unchanging, complete commitment to you. And that's what I find. I haven't always got this right. I've messed up more times than I care to remember. I've bottled it. I've missed the opportunities to take a risk. I've taken steps backwards instead of taking steps forward. I've got it wrong so many times. But what I've found is that the more I'm aware of how much I am forgiven, the more I'm aware of how much Jesus loves me, the more courage I feel in taking a risk towards him, taking a risk for him. It's a risk to respond to Jesus' offer of forgiveness. But I've done that, and I'm so thankful I have. I'm thankful for it every day. It was a risk to stand in a pub on a Friday afternoon, a Friday night in the city, surrounded by my new colleagues, and one of them lean over and say, "What do you think about Jesus?" And I saw two roads in front of me. One of them was the kind of implosion of my career, I thought. But I was open. I took the risk. And he's repaid that small act of faith more than anything I could ever imagine. It's a risk to invite my friends to Alpha, but I did it, and they loved it, and now I can't wait for the start of each term. It was a risk, like many of you, to work in an area where it feels like your faith is being contested the whole time, it's being challenged, and you're trying to work out, what does it mean to shape this culture, shape this context? But actually, he's used my small acts of risk, my small risks, more than I could ever imagine. And then for me, at 29, it was a risk, having built up a reputation, built up success, built up my prospects, my career taking off, more than I could ever have hoped for, to write a letter to my 49 colleagues, which said basically, they were my personal heroes, people I deeply admired, people who had trained me, to say, I'm going to go and be a pastor. It was a risk. In some ways, it's no different to a risk that you take every day in your workplace. To take the next step, to take the next step. And risk is very similar to faith. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. And when you take a step of faith, when you take a risk, it's amazing to see what God does with it. People say to me, oh, well, when you took that big decision, you must have felt so safe. You must have known that God was all over it. Safe? I didn't feel safe. The 2 months after I left my job, I basically sat with my head in my hands thinking, what have I done? I've sabotaged my career. I've taken a 90% pay cut, and I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of 18-year-olds learning New Testament Greek. This is a disaster. At no point taking those risks have I felt safe, but I have felt completely secure. Completely secure. Why? Because the one who encourages you to take a risk, to take a step of faith towards him, is entirely faithful. And with Jesus, you can take a risk. This woman, she unfurls her hair at his feet. In that culture, women would only unfurl their hair in their homes. But she does it in public because she wants to take the risk. She pours out her perfume on his feet. Those were the things which signified the only power, the only influence she had left in the world. And she lays it at Jesus' feet. She takes that risk because she has that faith. And with Jesus, you can risk your status because you know you can never lose the incomparable status of being a much-loved daughter, a much-loved son of God. You can risk your reputation because in the opinion of the only one who ultimately matters, you are held in the highest possible regard. You can risk your power because you know that his power is made perfect even in your weakness. You can risk your popularity because faith, which takes risks, win favor. And that trumps popularity every time. You can even risk your life because you know he has taken hold of you, and what he's taken hold of, he doesn't let go of. You can risk it all with security because you are risking what you can't keep to gain what you can't lose. And Jesus says, to her, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Your risk, it's worth it. Your risk is worth the reward. Just think what's possible as we live lives in this city, unhindered by thinking about what other people might think of us. Completely unfazed by fear, free, fearless, desiring to take the next step wherever he has placed you, in your workplace, in your university, in your school, in your home, in your community, in your business, in the boardroom, with your colleagues, wherever he has placed you, to take the next step of faith and to take a risk for him. In Jesus' name, amen.
I'm Bear Grylls. My favourite way to start the day, the Bible in 1 year. That's how wild I am.
Find out more at BibleIn1year.org or download the Bible in 1 Year app.